Hello and thank you for watching my video. This is another in the dungeon series looking at Honor of the Waves Path 2. This is one of the dungeons that isn't really done that much because it does take some time for some of the bosses. And as you can see here, we're actually right by the beginning and we've stacked up at this point here because you do get a lot of elite straight away. Very similar to P1 in the fact that we stacked, on the opposite side. And this time we're stacked over here. Again, that is the meta for the sort of dungeons in Guild Wars 2 currently, sort of stacking in certain locations, and its best way to sort of get the most amount of damage going. As you can see here, I'm just going to add a consumable, give me a bit more ferocity. I am on my condition damage engineer. He is pretty handy indeed, particularly for certain parts. I'll put in a magic vine booster as well. You can see here we've stacked up again. I'm just like, whoa, where is everybody? There we go. The boat is a bit slanty, so not the boat, but the sort of ice area we're in. And you can see here there's a lot of enemies around, and these are actually pretty easy to kill. We have the main boss here as well. But you can see here my consumables giving me a lot more extra power. I'm doing some pretty substantial damage, getting lots of conditions all over the place. I'd like you to keep an eye out as well, because if you can see here, obviously I'm doing bleeds and poison with a little bit of fire coming, sort of fire damage occasionally. Keep an eye out on the confusion actually pops below the usual sort of standard condition damage, and I try and do a lot of you can see I've got retaliation up, so I'm doing a lot of damage there. But I try to have a lot of confusion going up, because confusion I find very, very powerful. Obviously, against NPCs and against sort of enemies, enemy characters, it can be a bit tricky because they don't tend to pop their skills as much. But I'm doing like 2,500 damage every time he's activating skills here, which is quite significant. The bleeds are good and going quite well, and that's that boss done. Very, very standard. I actually do think that this is a much sort of undervalued dungeon. I do think this is a nice dungeon to do. The only issue is that a couple of the bosses are just very, very tanky and take a long time to take out, and that is the only issue. I mean, if you compare it with say Citadel Flame or Ascalon Catacombs, if some of the bosses here were reduced in health, this would be run as much as that, because it isn't too far to run. All it is that the actual enemy bosses, like one here, they have a lot more health than the bosses in sort of some of the other dungeons. So you can see we're stacked up here. We ran past one of the sort of legendary ones, and also one of the similar sort of things, and we're actually stacked up here. I'm doing quite a lot of condition damage. I've got some stats that allow, and traits that allow me, give me increased damage with the more conditions that are actually applied on a foe, and so that's why I'm getting some good numbers going up here, causing significant damage. If you look at our party composition, we have 2 engineers, which is pretty rare for a PvE dungeon run. I don't normally ever get more than 1 engineer. We have a guardian, a warrior, and a mesmer. So no elementalist, one of the heavy damage dealers in Guild Wars 2, and I was surprised that maybe it was our party composition that's why we actually didn't really hammer down those bosses as quickly as possible. This is a sort of a substantial video. It's just under 20 minutes in length, which means it's one of the medium type dungeons. It isn't a long dungeon, and I don't think people realise that. This can be done as quick as COE, and the only downside I think for a lot of people is it's the Honor of the Waves sort of dungeon tokens don't really give as much as say Ascalon Catacombs, Sorrow's Embrace, or even Citadel of Flame. But I found this enjoyable, and there is the end boss. I'll talk about that when we come to it. It's one of the things that, having done this dungeon, I haven't done this dungeon in like a year. It's been a long time since I've done this, and having done it again, I'm just wondering why I haven't done it that long. This is actually quite enjoyable, and some of the bosses are actually, I wish that they would bring into other dungeons. Having said that, I like dungeons to be as quick as possible, so I'm not going to press too much for all this. But anyway, you can see here we've stacked again. We've got the enemies coming up, all elites. I'm popping when I'm going to sort of my bomb kit, I pop skill 4 which is actually the blind. You can see there I was doing 4,000 damage, I believe, on some of the confusion, but I'm getting significant damage on all of these guys, because with my bomb kits I will do blinds and then I'll do confusion. You can see there I'll do some fire damage, and then I'll make sure sort of with the glue sort of bomb, keep them in place. And my bomb kits can really sort of control a lot of sort of enemy party. I also have my grenades that allow me to, you know, put chill on an opponent, and it's pretty handy, this build with a bomb kit and a grenade kit. So we come up to this next boss, and this is a bit where we're going to let the NPC die. The reason being, you're going to see what the enemy boss does. And not only that, the idea is that you want to separate these two champions away from the boss, the two champion Quaggons. And what will happen, we'll have one guy, or we'll try and draw the NPC towards them. You can see him there just behind one of our party members, and he is going to die, the NPC. And then what will happen, we'll be able to pull the two champions away from the main boss, and making the fight a lot more easier. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to skip forward this bit so you can see the enemy, like the champions don't really have too much damage and too many different attacks, but the boss does. Okay, so as you can see, the two champions are down, and now we get to take on this boss. The boss does have a very strong attacks. He has that sort of frost breath that has quite long range, and then he has these AoE attacks that really cause you significant damage as well. Now this I believe is what the bosses should be like in Guild Wars 2, because we cannot stack. Look at the way that our party is spread out all over the place. We are sort of doing ranged and close at melee attacks. Well, I'm going in melee. But then look, he's doing these AoE attacks. You have to move out of the way. He then does this frost breath, so if you're meleeing, you've really got to fall back. It's very different to what the bulk standard bosses that you get in other Guild Wars 2 dungeons. And this is why a lot of people don't do it. Because this is a challenging boss. You actually have to take evasive action. You actually have to think about what you're doing in the game. You're not just staying in the same spot and face rolling the keyboard, you know, to sort of blind or sort of, heal your party. This is a challenging boss. As you can see, two of my party are downed, me included, and the boss, you can see my condition damage is sort of keeping going. But again, this is a tricky boss. It's not difficult. It's tricky. That's all it is, and you have to pay attention to what you're doing. Which is for someone who's not been used to this, I was a little bit caught out at times. I was like, geez, man, what's the strategy here? You can notice where our party members are. We're all over the place. We're not stacked up, which means we're not giving out the might. You know what? I'm sure there are people that will go and stack on him and will be able to do that much effectively. That's fair enough. Our strategy here was to sort of split up, get out of the way of his AoE attacks like this here, and you try and get the damage done as quickly as possible. With my conditions, it's really able to hurt him, but look at that frost breath. You can't even get in. I'm trying to get in to do my grenades, and then it's just absolutely getting owned by the boss. So we're progressing quite nicely. We're down to about 25%, well 15% probably, and the boss is going to get downed and get killed. But I just like the fact that this boss is sort of different to it. He stops the meta for stacking in Guild Wars 2 dungeons, and I'm wondering if ArenaNet ever do decide to come back to sort of dungeons, will they bother sort of changing some of their way the bosses and so the AI sort of actually works, because Guild Wars 1's AI was much better than this, and obviously it's a different game, it's a different setup. You just got to wonder why they can't build it like this. But anyway, we're almost about to kill the boss. Then comes a little bit of a challenging bit. the reason why people don't tend to do P2 and P3 of Honor of the Waves is for one simple reason, and that is both bosses are underwater. And this is the bit I mentioned earlier, and I'd said I'd come back to. I'd forgotten about this, and I had forgotten to check. Like, I could not remember the last time my engineer went underwater, and I forgot my what I was actually equipped with. I completely forgot. I was like keeping like when I kept switching to like the spear gun, I was expecting like to have skill 3, which is the sort of confusion, and you notice it. I do it quite a lot, and I suddenly moved back, and I'm like, whoa! I didn't mean to move back. So here we go. We were actually taking out one of the fish, and just to point out that I didn't bring stability. I get knocked, and there is a tail that the fish has that you can dodge out the way. I didn't do it, and I was like confused. I was looking at the mini-map, and my party members are running away. So there's 3 of them ahead of me and 1 behind, and I'm like, oh, and look, they actually avoided the fish. They've got the mines here, the frozen mines that hit me, causing me bleeds. I don't even have a sort of healing turret as well. I'm getting knocked back. I'm going, what is going on here? I'm getting bleeds. I've got the F1 skill is different. I'm getting all confused. And this is like, you know, I'm going to try and use some turrets to sort of deflect the attention. And I'm like, yes, I'm away. Oh, damn, the iceberg got me. And that is going to be me dead. So the rest of my party got through, and I didn't. And the second, I actually tried this again, and I died again on my own. So it is a challenging bit. So what's happened, we've come back, and we're going to take out the fish. So I've kept this in because I wanted to show you guys that there are 2 options. The first option is to try and run through and avoid all the mobs. It is a risk. The second option is to take it a little bit more steadily, kill these damn fish, which have these sort of frost bombs, and you can go through the invisible wall, or sort of the frost wall, and these other fish, and when you come up to the ice brood, then you can run through a little bit quicker and a little bit more easier. So you can see here, we've got the, sort of the ice brood fish. They're not too hard to take out, even though they are elites. And what I just think I miss underwater combat. You know, they took it out of PvP, and I think that might have been a mistake. I enjoyed Raid on the Capricorn, but I think underwater combat is severely, you know, they made a big thing of this, and it actually is. When Guild Wars 2 launched, underwater combat was pretty cool, and it was pretty decent. This is my opinion, okay? I know a lot of people would disagree with me, saying underwater combat's a bit clunky, but I quite like the fact that it is a three-dimensional sort of you know, combat. It isn't the flat 2D that you have normally, and this is what I enjoy about this sort of dungeon. It gave me that sort of the experience of sort of not knowing what you're doing, and being sort of in the unknown again, and being a little bit of a noob again. That's what I am. And I was like, whoa, my underwater combat skills are just dire. You know, I don't even have underwater fully. The mask is like level 66 masterwork. It's not even like a rare or exotic. I do wish ArenaNet would come back and look at underwater combat. I think that it's undervalued. I think obviously people, I don't know why they didn't continue it, okay? I'll be honest, it's very rarely mentioned in the forums, and it's sort of been a cool thing to have, and then left to the side. So this is why this boss does tend to take a while. But what's cool, we've got a Mesmer, and you know, there are characters that are able to sync and sort of interrupt these sort of the bosses. As you can see, the boss does pretty heavy damage to our warrior. But you know, I've got my turrets here, and what's cool, you'll notice that's different is that the grenades and the sort of the supply kit don't actually have an AoE sort of targeting system. They actually just target automatically, which I like. You know, I like having that in underwater combat. It's just a bit of variety, and I'm hoping that, you know, if anyone at ArenaNet does see this and, you know, appreciates that, I feel underwater combat is good. I think that the player base has not taken, you know, not as I'm just trying to put this as eloquently as possible, but has not actually got involved in underwater combat as much as they should have done. You know, if I ever think that if we're ever going to go underwater to like, you know, the sea dragon, surely some of that's going to be underwater. I mean, the only real time that you play underwater in the story mode is when you're in actually a raft, sort of when you're in ore, and you actually have to sort of go into the Abaddon Temple, which is underwater, and you really have a lot of underwater combat there. And I think that they need to bring back some new. I think they need to bring back some new instances, some personal story, maybe in Heart of Thorns. But I doubt it. I think Heart of Thorns will have no underwater combat. So as you can see, this boss is going quite well. The idea is that, again, we're splitting it. The idea is to split up a little bit and to concentrate. You know, if you do get down, this is one of the things. If you get down, you can sort of swim away and just recover, which is again pretty cool. You know, you can actually evade and you can keep fighting and you can sort of float. There's no surface in this dungeon, so you can't actually sort of heal properly. You actually have to sort of take a time out, which is cool. You know, it's different. You can see he's got that swirling attack there. I'm popping my turrets, get them going, and the boss generally is a little bit tricky, but not difficult. And that is where I think that a lot of people, you know, why underwater combat hasn't, sort of these dungeons haven't been or aren't done as much, is that underwater combat is a bit underpowered, and that's why it does take a long time to do these bosses. You know, this boss I think took around 4 minutes to do, just for one boss, or 4 to 5 minutes at least. But you know, I'm not saying that our party was a pro party. We had a good party, I'll say that. You know, a lot better than some of the other parties I've been in. We were all pretty experienced, and we knew what we were doing most of the time. And I think that I going back to this dungeon and doing the underwater combat, I enjoyed it, and it made me a little bit sad that some of the underwater combat that I used to enjoy isn't as prevalent in the game. You know, I remember doing some of the against the Inquest, you know, particularly in like Metrical Province or Caledon Forest, or sort of those areas where the Inquest are based, and like they have their underwater facilities, and that was cool. You got to fight underwater, and it was where you started to. I think it was in Caledon, in Metrical Province, and you fought the Inquest, and I enjoyed that. You know, fighting underwater. But it's not as powerful as fighting on land, and so people try to avoid underwater combat as much as possible. And you know, you got to feel that ArenaNet have taken that on board and said, look, okay, underwater combat was something cool. It was something unique. It's made our game stand out. It's probably the best underwater combat out there, but it's not the be-all and end-all, and it hasn't been the overriding success as what they'd hoped. And so they're just quietly leaving it as it is, not doing any real changes. I mean, when was the last change you saw in an update to a underwater skill? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video and my little ramblings going on. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you on the next video.